Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and today we are here to do a JJK Chapter review. Yeah, that's right, we are back in Shinjuku. Now, the translations from TCB are out, so we're here to do a chapter review. Now, originally I did say I wasn't going to do a chapter review, but I lied because we did actually get some really good and useful information that I feel needs to be talked about in this chapter review. So welcome to the decisive battle in the uninhabited, demon-infested Shinjuku, part 29. Gege continues his perfect naming streak, just like that, for 29 parts. It's been perfect. Anyways, before we get into this video, if you like anime content like this, be sure to like and subscribe because we have a lot more on the channel, especially for Jujutsu Kaisen, currently only for Jujutsu Kaisen, but we are planning to have other anime. For example, we have a Hunter x Hunter video coming out later today or tomorrow. Anyway, let's get into this. The chapter starts out with narration text saying, "A tale from Sukuna himself," as Urame asks, "Itadori Yuji, what exactly is he? He's Kenjaku's child, couldn't tell you from which body of theirs though. I felt something from him deeply reminiscent of you, Sukuna-sama. That was before we laughed at his hilarious expression. It's not simply the leftover dregs of your power, but closer to an empty husk actively retaining elements of yourself. Blame Kenjaku. He wouldn't have a kid for no reason." Now, before we do continue on with the conversation, I am going to take a little bit of a pause to talk about what they're talking about in specific right now, and what this power-up does mean. Because if you remember back in 214, Yuji got an extremely massive power buff, an extremely massive buff to his power once Sukuna was free from his body. And Urame is now talking about how that power buff isn't likely just the remnants of Sukuna's curse energy, which this actually kind of confirms something that I had believed for the longest time, which this confirms the fact that Yuji had been massively suppressing himself this entire time until Sukuna left his body, mainly because of the fact that most of his soul was working to suppress Sukuna. So the moment that Sukuna was freed from him, he could have full access to his soul, which gave him full access to the power level that he should have been at this entire time. Now, of course, Yuji wasn't consciously doing this, but Yuji was suppressing himself this entire time, and this is effectively Urame saying that it wouldn't make sense if the power-up he had just gotten was just alone from the remnants of curse energy that was left from Sukuna inside of Yuji's body, but it was actually parts of his own soul, which led to that amazing physical buff in terms of power that Yuji got against Sukuna. Furthermore, this also confirms that Sukuna has some level of awareness of a bunch of Kenjaku's bodies, meaning he more than likely had seen several of his vessels over time, more than just likely the ghetto one and whatever he met in the Heian era. However, he doesn't know which one it originated from or the origins from it. Anyway, back to the chapter, we return back to Sukuna's own text as he continues to tell the tale to Urame. As he says, "The one Kenjaku coupled up with was likely a fragment of myself reincarnated. Our souls are the same. I was to be a twin, but I rejected such a fate. Forced by my own mother's blight, I consumed a fragment of myself on the brink of starvation. His soul bounced around aimlessly until it eventually fell into Kenjaku's hands. You know this already. Itadori Yuji was not only being bred to be a player in the culling games, but also to seal my fingers. That much was likely necessary to ensure his strength as a vessel." Before we turn to Urame, as Urame says, "Is that so? Does this mean within Itadori Yuji lies a latent potential equal to Sukuna-sama?" Now, this is where we're going to take another break before we get into the action in order to break down basically everything that was just said. Number one, this just straight up confirms that Jin Itadori was originally Sukuna's brother, and basically when Sukuna ate his brother, that soul wandered around aimlessly, more than likely having countless reincarnations for the 1,000 years until it eventually ended up meeting Kenjaku. And this is when we get into the second point. Now, originally with the translations that I was using in my previous video, I had to make a bunch of arguments as to why Yuji does possess that same soul and Kenjaku basically transferred that soul from Jin Itadori into Yuji Itadori. However, I think this chapter just straight up confirms that Yuji got his soul transferred, and he's basically his father, while also Sukuna being both his uncle in spirit, but his brother in spirit. It is super weird. However, Sukuna talks like him and Yuji share the same soul, and more importantly, his wording at the end of "you know this already, Itadori Yuji was not only being bred to be a player in the culling games, but also to seal my fingers," and that being why Urame senses remnants of Jin Itadori's soul in Yuji. It all makes incredible amount of sense that Kenjaku just transferred over Jin's soul into Yuji Itadori. And this chapter, I think, just straight up confirms it, especially considering knowledge we have in the past that we already know Kenjaku is fully capable of transferring one soul into another body, thanks to the culling games and Sukuna. Also, this interestingly enough confirms the possibility of reincarnation within JJK, because while a lot of people have speculated on reincarnation, because reincarnation is very, very different from incarnation, which is what all the sorcerers are doing. Reincarnation is basically respawning in a new life. As a lot of people know, this is the first time it ever gets confirmed and is a twin thing. So it might actually be possible that Mai Zenny might end up getting reincarnated in the future, mainly because of the fact that she ended up dying for Maki to be fully completed, but we don't really know. We don't know exactly how Jin Itadori's soul had managed to start reincarnating for this long. We just know that it did end up reincarnating for this long. And finally, the most important thing of this all, Yuji Itadori has equal latent potential to Sukuna, just based on the fact that Yuji and Sukuna have the same soul overall. Now, this could mean that Yuji has even more potential because of things that Kenjaku could have done to Yuji, but we don't exactly know what Kenjaku could have done that might have added on to this. Also, this does mean something else that I find very, very interesting and also kind of funny. Yuji and Sukuna have the same soul, which means even if Sukuna wasn't inside of Yuji, Mahito could never idol transfigure Yuji purely because they have the same soul, and it was just the soul that kicked Mahito out, so Mahito could never beat Yuji in a fight. However, now we get into the action of this chapter, and oh boy, there is a lot of this good action because this looks absolutely amazing, as Sukuna and Yuji both get into their respective stances, in a similar way to how the Yuji and Choso had fought, and it kind of just being like a reference to that, which is also a reference to a movie called The Raid 2, for people who do not know what that reference is. If you like fighting movies, check out The Raid 2, it's genuinely really good. As the battle immediately starts with Sukuna trying to punch Yuji, however, Yuji uses his palm to deflect the punch before backhand palm striking Sukuna in the gut, landing a black flash, this being the second black flash he has now landed, before Yuji's elbow hits against Sukuna's side, landing another black flash on him, now landing a total of 3 black flashes, with 3 black flashes as his consecutive record, while at the same time Sukuna also landing a black flash, resulting in Yuji being launched out of the building with Sukuna chasing after him. As Yuji is launched out the building, Yuji grabs onto one of the pillars, and we see something very, very interesting about how Yuji grabs onto the pillars, because we see scissors and lines begin to appear on that pillar, before we swap over to the narrator, as the narrator says, there are currently 2 curse techniques residing within Itadori Yuji. The first, blood manipulation, engraved by absorbing the curse paintings, numbers 4 through 9. The second one, drawn out by the awakened state through Black Flash. The technique engraved upon the reincarnated body of Ryomen Sukuna, Shrine. So not just has Yuji landed a total of 3 black flashes so far, but Yuji is now capable of also using Dismantle, as he used Dismantle to cut a part of the pillar and throw it at Sukuna. However, there's something else that I find very, very interesting that one of you guys in the comments actually pointed out to me in my most recent video as well, which is the fact they say currently there are 2 curse techniques residing inside of Itadori Yuji, which means it could be possible he's going to get a 3rd one. And for people who've been on the channel for a little bit, you know what I think he's going to get: anti-gravity system, because I still stand by the fact that Yuji is going to get it, and they didn't give it to Kaori Itadori for no reason. However, the fact that this is the way that they decide to show off Yuji using Cleave and Dismantle is something that I find very interesting. Man, I've said very interesting a lot in this video. I can't wait for the new comments on that. Anyways, the reason why I think it's so fascinating is purely because of the fact that Sukuna uses it in a very different way. And it makes me wonder if Sukuna has these little knife indicators instead, because his way of imagining it is a knife, but Yuji's way of imagining it is scissors. The Shrine technique might just warrant its own video, because I do have some theories about how it functions and about potential binding outs that Sukuna might have put on it to make it stronger or weaker. But that's for another day. Anyway, right back to the chapter review, we see Sukuna cut up the pillar that was launched right at him into several small rock pillars in order to get it in the way, but Yuji then grabs onto Sukuna's leg and tries to cut it off, but Sukuna is very quick to launch out his own slashes in return to Yuji, cutting up a part of his cheek. However, it's then after Yuji lands his 4th consecutive Black Flash right on Sukuna's gut, before we swap over to Sukuna's internal dialogue, as Sukuna thinks to himself, it's the same technique, yet the era and the sorcerer using it brings about a sizable disparity. How foolish. A freshly learned technique means low output. What's much more troublesome are these blows. Now, in my opinion, this does actually make a lot of sense when you think both about Cleave and Dismantle as well as blood manipulation on Yuji, mainly because of the fact that Yuji is extremely new to these. Meanwhile, he's been punching and kicking all of his life, so his punches and his kicks being the most dangerous thing makes a lot of sense, even though blood manipulation would offer a lot more versatility, and Cleave and Dismantle offers the range that Yuji has been lacking. It's not what he is naturally good at, and it's not what he's naturally used to, because he's ultimately still just a punch-kick fighter in spirit, even though he now has other abilities. And he's only had blood manipulation for 1 month, while he's also only had cleaving dismantle for like the past few seconds. So yeah. As then we get a flashback from Ino himself, which is basically Ino trying to ask Gojo, Ichiji, and Shoko if it would be okay for Ino to use Nanami's curse tool, mainly because those guys were Nanami's old friends. However, they basically all just tell him that they've known Ino for even longer than they have, and just know him better because Nanami didn't really talk to anyone after he left the school and after he graduated. Meanwhile, Ino had talked to him much longer, and Nanami was basically his teacher, but most of all, Nanami had trusted him more than anyone, as we got a panel from Gojo saying we mean it. And then Ino, right after, summons the legendary beast that has been hyped up for so long through the data books, Ryu. As then Ryu slams Sukuna into a wall, and while I know this is a massively weakened and suppressed Sukuna, he still manages to push Sukuna back, which is insanely impressive before Ryu is cut up by Sukuna. But still, at the same time, this is very, very impressive because not that many people can say they can push Sukuna against a wall. However, Ino then tries to hit Sukuna with the blunt blade, but Sukuna stops it with his foot. However, right after, Yuji in the Jajan-Ken stance punches Sukuna with another Black Flash. Before we get Sukuna thinking to himself, this brat, he's been chaining Black Flashes like it's nothing. Does he intend to climb up to my level? And I think this is the final nail in the coffin that the Black Flash amps do stack, purely because of the fact Sukuna says, does he intend to climb up to my level? So for anyone who has been thinking the Black Flash amps do not stack, this is the confirmation that they do. However, then we get Ino lying on the ground thinking that he is out of his league, with Sukuna destroying the ground that Yuji was standing under. However, Yuji is able to hop out of the way of the destruction of the ground before Sukuna tries to go in for a punch that Yuji catches, and then Yuji immediately punches Sukuna in the chest. Now, it should be noted, this is what would break his consecutive Black Flash total. So his consecutive right now is 5, which means he has now fully and truly broken Nanami's record, landing a total of 5 consecutive Black Flashes. However, I will say it's also extremely impressive that Yuji is able to punch Sukuna back with that punch. Mainly because it wasn't a Black Flash, and some of Yuji's Black Flashes weren't even pushing Sukuna back that much, which really just shows how much the 120% potential amp actually is to Yuji Itadori. As we get a callback back to 214 when Yuji had walked through Sukuna's slashes, when Sukuna thinks to himself, he's completely unfazed by my combination of strikes and slashes, with Yuji walking through them and landing another Black Flash on Sukuna's gut, breaking the wall beneath them. However, Sukuna grabs Yuji's face and uses cleave on his face, but as we all know, pain won't stop Yuji Itadori, as Yuji lands another Black Flash. As Sukuna then shouts, calling him a brat, before the blunt blade out of nowhere smacks Sukuna straight in the face. And Ino thinks to himself, you know what, for someone on my level, I think I did a pretty good job. Kick his ass. And I need to say this for LaRue and Ino. Those two are some MVPs right now because those two are doing numbers. Now, I think it's more LaRue, but both of them did amazing as support, so I gotta give them their credit, especially because they're way out of their league. With Yuji landing, before it's then, while Sukuna is distracted, yet again, Yuji lands another Black Flash right on Sukuna. As the chapter ends with no break next week, and the editor note saying, don't just rival the king, surpass him. Now, this chapter had a lot of heat because a lot of theories were just generally confirmed in this chapter. For example, Yuji and Sukuna's relation, Yuji's power-up in 214 coming from the fact that most of his soul was working to suppress Sukuna, Yuji now landing a total of 8 Black Flashes, and most of all, Yuji awakening Cleave and Dismantle. There's also potential theories that could be confirmed in the future with the wording of how Yuji has currently only 2 curse techniques. So it could be potentially possible that Yuji might awaken a 3rd technique, and Yuji continuing to grow to reach the level of Sukuna through the Black Flashes, even with Sukuna thinking that that's what he intends to do. And most of all, Ino being an absolute champ and helping where no one else could have, because Ino is the champ. Now, this chapter is just one of my favorite chapters in a long while. I absolutely love this chapter, but I want to hear what you guys think in the comment section down below about this chapter. Thank you for watching. Hope y'all have a good day. Peace.